Hey everyone, and welcome to the Building Geniuses podcast, where we talk to geniuses throughout the commercial real estate and building automation industries, asking them how they've gotten where they are, who's walked alongside them, and how they're helping others along the way. This is episode 8 of season 2, and I'm your host, Tim Vogel. In today's episode, we're speaking with Emmanuel Daniel of Microsoft. Hey Emmanuel, welcome to the Building Geniuses podcast.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to be here.
I have had the pleasure of having several conversations with you. And the one conversation that I think I will always remember was when I got to meet you in person and we met together for lunch. It was just going to be a quick lunch and we just talked for hours, man. And that was just a really wonderful and rich conversation. And so having you on the podcast is just really, special to me. And I think, it's going to be special to other people in the industry as well and people listening. And also you have really portrayed a very particular vision for what a smart building could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because of ultimately it's the occupant focus doesn't quite give it justice. It's the human focus on what you're trying to do. And I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of that. But for the audience, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do for Microsoft today?
Great. Excellent. Happy to. And thank you so much, Tim, for having me on the podcast. I must say, I really loved our lunch conversation that spanned over lunch, went into coffee and went into tea. And, we were still right there. But great to be on your podcast. My name is Emmanuel Daniel. I work for Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for over 11 years, held a variety of roles. Currently, I'm part of the data center organization, where I oversee digitization of data center construction, helping us accelerate and deliver data centers faster, quicker through the help of technology. Prior to that, I was at Microsoft Global Workplace Services, also known as Real Estate and Security, where I oversaw the modernization of Microsoft's East Campus program, which is basically us building a new East Campus from the ground up after demoing down the old buildings, where the entire focus was how do you make space adapt to the needs of the human, whereby you are delighting the human in the space, or the space works for you. What does that entail? How do you design it? I think you said it very well at the start, putting the human at the center of space. And the key thing here is all human. It's not just the occupants, it's not just the owners, it's not just the visitors. It is anybody who comes into contact with that space must be made to feel special, to feel connected. And that's what the goal of that program was.
And that's amazing. Who put together kind of that charge to delight and make people feel special? Was that a charge that you came up with and led with, or was that a charge from kind of higher up?
So, I'll probably say it was a collective effort of the team that was put together at that point in time. When the campus transformation program was being discussed and put together, the beauty is, it's not just about aesthetics. You can make a beautiful building, but the beautiful building can be very uncomfortable, for all those who come into contact with it. Our goal was, okay, if we have to make this campus and our campus is effectively a city, how do you create a space where everybody would love to come and work, would love to come and connect? And in addition to that, it's not just about work. It's about bringing your friends, your family, kids coming in, running around, the future of what we could expect. How do you design that? And because Microsoft is this huge melting pot of everybody coming together and having so much of fun, we wanted to be true to that. And that's why we said, as a company which everybody looks up to, shouldn't our spaces also be spaces where everybody loves to come into contact with? And that's what laid the foundation for the vision, where we put any human that comes into our buildings on our campus and connects with it is going to be delighted. That's how it started.
Yeah, and that's again, I use the term rich because so many times when we talk about smart buildings, we're talking about how can we decrease energy costs, decrease energy consumption, increase occupant and tenant safety and efficiency. And it's almost like these cold buzzwords that are just very focused primarily around, finances. How can we save money and make our workers more productive? It's this kind of industrial mindset. But your path has kind of seemed to be a little less industrial and much more, obviously dollars and cents, cash flow is important, but at the end of the day, it's all about the people.
It's rightly said. And I think, it is important to know that efficiency is absolutely important, because we can't have buildings that are going to drain our finances out, so efficiency was absolutely critical. But the vision for us was very simple. We said you need to have efficient buildings, but a lot of times humans in those spaces don't appreciate the efficiency of the building. They don't even know the buildings are efficient. I've given this example a few times where if a human comes inside, you expect the lights to work, you expect the air conditioning to work, you expect the toilets to flush, but all of it works seamlessly. But you don't understand the amount of effort that goes in from the facilities team to make sure all of that works correctly. We talked about sustainability. We talked about, choosing the greenest grid for powering up our buildings. But at the end of the day, what is the benefit to the human being in that space? How do they get delighted? How do they get engaged? So what we said was, in addition to having efficient buildings, where everything's about energy, everything's about fault detection and diagnostics, and at the same time ensuring that the buildings are top-notch in the way they're performing, we also said, could we leverage the infrastructure, leverage data, and use that to start engaging with users in that space? And by engaging with them, they not only get delighted, but they also have a greater appreciation of the effort that it takes to maintain the space the way it is. And that way, we get a lot of visibility down to operations. We also get a lot of visibility down to the occupants, the users in that space to say, what do you want? What makes you happy? What is going to make your day better and greater? At the same time, hey, look at all the hard work that's going inside. So I would probably say that this allowed us to put operations of buildings a front row seat to understand who their users are and give users the opportunity to appreciate how critical operations are to be able to delight them with the experiences that they're getting.
And in a way, you're giving them ownership in that space too, which then drives ultimately appreciation.
Yep.
Yeah. Similar, just kind of in organizational leadership or organizational behaviors. The more ownership you can give people, the more they're going to buy in and then do what is best overall for the health of the company or the team or the group or the product or the project, whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, it's just kind of it's extending that mentality and that truth, the kind of the psychological truth into something like the buildings, which is why every time you talk about the building and you've made kind of a name for yourself and going on speaking circuits and making sure that you're staying involved and things like whether it's a panel or giving a conversation, because it really is a unique perspective that you just simply don't hear at wide scale in the industry. And I certainly want to get to that, but why don't we rewind a little bit? So kind of the ethos of this podcast is to talk about how you got to the point where you're doing what you're doing now. And that, that kind of starts with many, many small steps along the way, and then people that have kind of influenced you as well. So how far back is relevant to go as we talk about the story of Emmanuel Daniel?
So, I'd probably say going as far back as my first smart building program that I kicked off back in Singapore, how that influenced and shaped my thinking to what it should be. And along the way, my quest on human engagement and human experience that shaped the entire foundation of what experiential buildings are, or experience-led buildings should be, to translating it to spaces that are more engaging, welcoming, and hospitable for all those who come into contact with it. That probably would be, anything farther than that, we probably be here for hours. That should set the tone.
Well, what did you go to school for? College degree, all that, right?
Yeah. So I went to, I have my bachelor's in engineering. So I did information technology as my major. So I didn't do mechanical, electrical, or, any of the evergreen branches of engineering, which always gets people talking. How did a computer science graduate, get into the world of building automation and technology? And
yes.
In addition to that, I did 2 other degrees not connected to building automation. I ended up doing a master's in operations and supply chain management, and then an MBA. So, when I walked into the room, it's like, a computer science engineer is going to tell us how to design buildings and make them more connected and experiential. And they said, how much do you know about HVAC design? I said, well, not my area of expertise. How much do you know about thermodynamics. So, also not my expertise, but this is what we call, you learn along the way. So do I know about it now? Yeah, I've read so many books and papers on the topic I do. But for me, it started with software. And I worked my way through software and got into hardware, building design, building mechanics. And that's how it started getting into this world, which always gives people a good laugh, to say, oh, you're a software engineer. I said, yep, you're telling us about building automation.
Yeah.
That's true.
So what was the transition then? Like, what was the opportunity to go from software engineer to the smart building project in Singapore?
The great question. So how it started was, I'm from Singapore. Singapore's home for me. And in Singapore, I was focusing on public cloud, right? This was the advent where public clouds are coming out. And I did a lot of work advising governments and large accounts on how they should adopt the public cloud. What should public cloud policy be? And as part of the work along the way, I got an opportunity where we had a project with the Singapore government where they said, hey, we want to focus on sustainability. And we want to focus on sustainability whereby we can make our buildings efficient, intelligent, and smart. And I was tasked to go and define what that means. So like, well, okay, great. We all know what sustainability is, right? There's no rocket science. Yeah. Then I said, sure, but how do you build a strategy? And discussions led to a point where we said, hey, the role of building operations, how do we rebrand building operations? Where building operations is something that a person that goes to college would look up to. But we said, if we can take building operations out of the basement, out of the small, tiny security room that is there in a building and make it a very desired and sought after function, how would we do it? How would we make it attractive so the next generation of people that are going to graduate say, this is what I want to do? And the backdrop to this is Singapore always has a labor problem, purely because it's a small, tiny island nation, great nation. But, as with anybody, there is always a shortage of skills. And in the field of building operations, you know how difficult it is to find the right talent because it's not something that, people aspire to become. Hey, when I grow up, I want to become a building technician.
That's right.
So while discussing that, we then started looking at saying, okay, why would people not want to get into it? What is happening today? And that started my quest into understanding how buildings are designed. What are the elements that go into building? What are the components and the assets? And all of a sudden, when I said, wow, this is unbelievable. Why don't people rush into building operations as a practice? What is stopping them? What is making it less attractive? It's like you build a plane, you build a train, you look at all the millions of parts that go inside, which is just like a building. You build a building, you have all these components that go into it. And especially when you talk about data and data points in a building, you've got hundreds and thousands of data points coming in. So then I started exploring the human angle of people love beautiful buildings. People love malls. People love spaces. But why don't people love to make experiential places, where the space is designed to respond to my needs? And that led me down to the quest of saying, what, I think we have to start designing buildings as important as aesthetics are, as important as efficiency is. Experience within that space is equally important because it is the experience in that space that will make people coming back more and more to say, what, I love working out of that space. I love visiting that space because that space gets me. And this was all based on data. This was all based on human emotions, behavioral engagements that would prompt them and satisfy them at that point they're in. Because, just like day and night and seasons, human bodies, human minds go through the evolution. So, what I want for breakfast today may not necessarily be what I want for breakfast tomorrow. I would love to sit near the window when it's a sunny day, but when it's a rainy day, I'd like to sit somewhere else, probably near the fireplace, huddle up, have a cup of coffee. Now, the space has to respond to these needs. How do I drive that engagement so human emotions could be translated to environmental factors that is going to motivate you to be the best version of yourself was what I then started realizing as a factor to motivate people to start engaging with buildings and building design and building experiential design in particular. That's what started off. When that kicked off, people thought, is this really a thing? Buildings are beautiful. We follow all our guidelines and standards. People will come to buildings anyway. But then, hey, you have so many buildings. Why should they choose building X versus building A? What would motivate them to come to your space versus going to somebody else's space? That's where I started exploring the concept of services that would prompt people to come to you. And I have this example where I say that I got kids. I have a daughter who's 12 and a son who's 7. Mornings at home are hectic because, we got to get them and rush them out to school. And when you are navigating the short distances but heavily traffic jam distances, every minute counts. You have to get there on time so you don't miss the bus, or you get there to school on time so you don't miss that last bell. And during those circumstances, having optimum routes defined for me, or telling me that, hey, if you leave now, you're able to go and get your meeting on time because, we have a parking spot right there for you. Or, hey, we have a hot cup of coffee so you will be sharp and fit as a fiddle. So these small elements, what I said, if a parent could get 5 extra minutes hugging their child at the footsteps or where they have to drop them off, who would not take it, right? So you don't want to be late, but at the same time, having that 5 extra minutes to hug your child or to high five your child, or in my case, I will fist bump them when they leave is important. And if me coming into a space is going to allow me to do that, I would rather choose to go to that space and work in that space. And that's what we tried to do, driving those human emotions and engagements, which we take for granted. And all of a sudden you realize, hey, you know what? I've not been able to take my kids to school this whole week because I had to be at office and I just couldn't make it on time. So I'd rather be on time for the meeting. What if you could have both? And that's where the whole beauty of experiential design for the spaces that you have to go to and work in start to come in. That's what motivated me to get that 5-10 extra minutes with human family, with human engagements that we all take for granted, till such time we don't have it anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I always think about my 2 boys, 7 and 9. My wife will typically take them to school, and she's like, got it so it's plotted out almost down to the second, right? Like if we leave at 7:03, then we're gonna get there way too early. But if we leave at 7:07, it's like we're gonna be last in line, and you're not gonna be in the school. So it's like 7:05 is the time, and when they're walking out the door at 7:06, she's sweating bullets, and I love it though. It's like you just figure it out. But I don't think it's a natural thing to think, even for our personal lives, that extra 5 minutes is really important to me, and I'm not prioritizing that. But if our buildings and our spaces and our technology are helping optimize for those human moments, that's when it's immensely valuable, and you're grateful and you're thankful for those times.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, and it's a different mentality altogether. So why, I guess. So you had this charge, right? The smart building. How do you think about it differently? How do you maximize human experience, human engagement? Was that a natural thing for you to dive into, or did that kind of you were kind of like, well, where do I start? What do I need to learn? What behavioral studies do I need to know? I mean, what was the kind of learning pathway along that way?
So that's a great question, and in fact, a lot of people ask me, what motivated you to start studying and to get into the space? What was that trigger? And for me, Tim, the space was always personal, because I was a traveler from a very young age. My parents worked abroad, and I would travel like crazy. I probably should have collected all those miles, but I didn't. I had better things to do when I was younger. And whenever I would travel, be it to school, be it on a plane, or be it at a lounge, or wherever my parents are, I would always try to make that space very, very personal to me. And it's a very unconscious, when I go into a hotel room, I will have the room arranged in a way where, I have the clocks at the angle that I would like to see them at. I would have the chairs, the tables, and the space would get so comfortable. During my initial years, I used to do a lot of ID strategy consulting. And, I would be on the road six, maybe 7 days a week at times. So the airplane, the hotels were probably my best friends during those moments, and I would crack that I could sleep so well on a plane. It's just crazy how well I sleep. Once I sit on that seat, I'm gone. That's it. But through that, I always felt it important to change minute details of the space that I am in, so I feel comfortable, so I feel relaxed, right? And I said, when I started doing that, and I started looking at building design as a whole, where I would do it as something that I wanted to do because that's how comfortable that space made me feel. Food habits, the choice of the type of drinks I would take, the choice of how I would like my air to be blowing when I'm sleeping, so it doesn't fall and wake me up every time it gets on. The temperature, okay, the ability to have lighting, when to use natural lighting if I want to get inspired when looking at kids playing in a park, or I just want to go heads down, by happening to focus and read on a book or a technical manual that I have to get sorted out. So these elements would always take me time, and that prep time was enormous. Sometimes the adjustment of the environment around me would take longer than the actual meeting itself. But I would do it regardless, because I said, this is what makes me feel comfortable and this is what I need to do. And when I started looking at buildings and how they're designed and all the hard work that goes into building operations and all the data that they're collecting, I said, hey, what if I could empower humans in that space to take charge of the environment, where they're able to adjust it to specs that are optimum for their performance? What would that mean? Right? And that's when I thought buildings collect a lot of data. A lot of people may not realize how much of data buildings collect. They just think a building goes on and off. But buildings are treasure troves of data, tons and tons of data. Why don't we capitalize on that data? But then to capitalize on that data, I had to understand what human experiences are and what experience design is. So I got into a little bit of, say, a mixed bag of an education journey. From a software perspective, from a data perspective, from an innovation perspective, I had done, I'd probably say, I was pretty good at that point in time. But then human behaviors was an area that I had a gap in. So I started understanding, how do humans get motivated? How do humans get engaged? What is going to drive positive stimulation? What is going to keep them engaged? And you'll notice it is small, minute things which we really take for granted that has the biggest impact on how good or how bad your day is going to turn out. And in addition to that, I then started looking at what kind of data do buildings collect, and what additional data do I need for the buildings to collect, so that I'm able to empower the humans in that space to choose how the environment around them is going to work for them. It's as simple as saying that if you have a group of friends, let's say that you have fresh university recruits that just graduated, they're going to conquer the world. They're not going to come into the office and say, oh, look at this beautiful desk and this chair. I'm going to sit right here in this small little corner and be heads down reading an operations manual. No, that's not going to happen no matter how much we think that. Well, they're going to say, hey, we're all here together. How do I get to know my colleagues? Can we hang out? Can we share bread? Can we break bread? Can we have a meal together? Could we go on an exploration journey just to understand what this place is all about? Now, how would I enable that so I would create a positive motivation for younger folks to enjoy and experience the space that they're in? Because ultimately, you've heard this a lot now. Iron sharpens iron, so man sharpens man. You need your group to help you hone in and to focus on the outcomes you're going to achieve. Yes, individual time is important, but so is group time. And creating positive engagement for the group is what that data is going to do. So using those trigger points of what kind of experiences they would like to have. Do people bond over food? Do people bond over coffee? What kind of spaces should people engage on? The flexibility that they have to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to go for a walk, and I just want to explore the surroundings around me. How could I learn about the flora, the fauna? How could I hear about the demographics of the zone that I'm living in? How could I go for an ad hoc, impromptu yoga class or a session that I really want to go into so that, I could free my mind? Giving the right kind of information, and once again, not information overload, because, you give them too much of stuff, they don't know what to choose, but curating it so they are able to find what they want to do. And you soon discover that people like an adventure. People like a journey. And it's not the journey itself, but it's the connection points on that journey. So how do I trigger those connection points? How do I motivate that engagement is what we want to do. Now, you take someone who's been in the company for a very long time, a senior executive who has grown up through that company. Their focus may not be the flora and fauna or the huge exploration of the campus or the group engagement. They may be important, but for them, it's about saying, hey, I need efficiency. How am I going to get to my space in the most optimum way? How am I going to get all that I need to get done and find a way to cram in a 30-minute gym break or find a way to have a group lunch with my colleagues and friends? Right? So priorities start to shift. The space is the same, but different purposes and different needs based on the stage of life that human is at and what they would like to see. Triggering all of that, consuming all of that through data points without infringing on privacy and spooking people out was what we wanted to do. And that was the beauty of it, where the space is doing what you need it to do so that you can be a better version of yourself is what I wanted to create.
Were there some people in your life kind of along the way that you were learning this with or that you were learning from that was particularly impactful?
I'd probably say a lot of people. And sometimes, human engagements, I view everybody that I meet as an opportunity to learn. I would probably say that my, starting with my parents, their quest and zeal to motivate me to go to places I've never gone before. The engagement that they would say that, hey, it's okay, try it, we'll see how it goes. I'm like, are you guys sure? That, yeah, sure, you'll be fine. I'm like, well, okay then. If you, the positive encouragement that I get from them when they say that, hey, just try it, never know what will happen. There's no such thing as succeed or fail. Trying it is winning. I think that positive attitude, and you'll see that a lot from the folks that I work with. I always say, you know what, it doesn't matter. Try it. We'll see what happens. We'll figure it all out later. I would also say the engagement that I had with people that I meet, all the way from folks that work in and around buildings. The amount of information you can learn about the people that work in the building, from the security guard at the front desk or the reception, is just unbelievable. The behavior patterns that they pick up on everybody that passes that desk or walks through that space, working with the maintenance folks that come up to service either the air vent or the HU when it makes sounds, and you're understanding from them, hey guys, what do you guys do? They'll probably think that I have nothing better to do than to ask them these questions, but then the learning moments that I would get. I also had great, leaders of the building automation space that I've worked with, pioneers and stalwarts. If you go down to the Microsoft operations team, the RFM crew, top class, just unbelievable how much they know. If you go to our design team, who designs all our workspaces, and you ask them, hey, why do you design spaces the way they are? I learned the importance of pastel tones and shades after I moved to Redmond, and why it is important to reflect the nature of the place that you're living in from those folks. My kids, a huge impact, because every time they ask me a question for which I don't have an answer, I'm like, well, hold on. And my kids actually asked me when we moved to Redmond from Singapore, they said, Dad, what do you do? Do you build a building? I'm like, something like that. I don't actually build a building. Then they said, but Dad, you said you make smart buildings. I'm like, yeah. So if you don't build a building, then what do you do? I'm like, that's a great question. Let me get back to you with an answer that you probably understand and comprehend. All the human triggers that I would achieve, multiple journeys along the way. There was one project where we said that, hey, the world's first AI-enabled building. What does that mean? What is that going to create? What does that reflect? So using those triggers as learning opportunities along the way to say that, I get where this is going, I get what this means, and being able to explain it to a 5-year-old. I said, this is basically what it is, and this is why it is so cool. I've also learned along the way how complex experience design can be, because when you start talking about devices, when you start talking about data, you start talking about networks. Yeah, I was never a network specialist, I was more of a software developer and an IT strategy guy. But when you start talking about network design, wired and wireless, when you start talking about the different kinds of protocols or which data is best suited to flow, you start talking about range, you start talking about how best to conceal all of the assets. So when people walk into a building, they don't feel like they're walking into a telecom enclosure with wires and servers and lights blinking everywhere. Bringing all this together and understanding these concepts was paramount in learning. And what I discovered was you always have an expert who's spent their entire life focusing on that one space, getting their time and getting them to give you their time, because everybody's busy. By explaining to them what you're trying to achieve is probably the biggest challenge that I've faced. But once they understand what you're trying to do, I've learned from everybody, Tim. I don't think there has been one person. Everybody that I meet with, I'm in a constant flux of learning. I was actually telling my wife this, then she said, how do you keep in touch with current affairs of the country that you land in? I said, oh, it's simple. I just start talking with the taxi driver. I go there, sit on the backseat of the taxi, and say, hey, what's happening? What are you doing? All you have to do is listen. And, within 20 minutes of your ride, you know exactly what's happening, what the local challenges are, what's up, what's down, what you should be doing, where you should be going. And the best part is all this advice is free. Nobody charges you a dime for it. But then those are the inspirations that I take and say, okay, let me use this to create something that I can't create before. I was joking with someone where they said the importance of flushing. I don't randomly go to people and ask them, hey, flushing is important. Let's all flush. You won't do that. But then when you talk to a maintenance person and he talks to you about the plumbing, and he talks to you about stagnant water and why flushing is important and how important it is to ensure that, you have hygiene, you have cleanliness, and the challenges that come as a result of it, you get a new fond fascination for subjects that you would in a million years never touch, because they're not software engineering concepts and neither are they IT strategy concepts. And that's what prompts and motivates my curiosity. Even wavelengths of light, Tim. Why would I go and do a study on wavelengths of light? Because of the direct correlation that they have on human behaviors is now all of a sudden you start paying attention, wow, wavelength of light. Okay, what is the optimum wavelength for humans to work in? How do I tune light properties? That's how the learning happens. Inspiration by all people and everything that is around me.
There are a huge number of topics there. The color temperature, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's all of the lighting, and there's been a huge amount of studies that's been done with that. And then how does that change from morning to evening?
Yep.
How does that change in the middle of the day? How could you maximize daylight as much as possible or mimic it as close as possible? And then, there was, this is only going to be a half story because I can't remember the second half or like what the exact effects were. But there was someone that said, well, hey, you put in these LED lights, but we have LED lights that will actually save you half the amount of energy because of the frame rate at which they go. But then that frame rate itself was actually impacting subconsciously how people were, interacting with things and doing things, and actually decrease their productivity. So it's like you decrease cost, but you also decrease productivity. I can't remember exactly how much it was. It could have been not that much, but still, it's just interesting how these small changes can have very tangible and real effects on the people in those spaces. So how long have you been at Microsoft now?
I'm coming up for 12 years now. So it's been a good long journey. Fun journey.
Does it feel like 12 years?
No, that's the funny part. I've done so many different things at Microsoft. It just, it feels like I just joined a few months ago. The fast-paced, dynamic environment of the stuff that I do changes so quickly. When I actually sit back and say, wow, it's been 12 years. Has it? It's like, wow, man, I didn't feel a thing. I just, I remember every project that I actually did a count of the number of engagements and the number of countries I visited with Microsoft, because sometimes you need, physical and quantitative measures to tell you what you've actually done. And the last I counted, I visited around 26 countries and done over 200 engagements in a 12-year span. I was like, wow, that is a lot of stuff. But it doesn't feel like it at all. It's just one of those things that just passes you by.
An amazing amount of opportunity that comes with doing the kind of work that you're doing. And then when did you join the buildings team? I mean, were you part of the buildings team from the very beginning, or was that just kind of a short stint in the middle?
No. So I started off my focus in Microsoft. Microsoft used to have Microsoft services at that point in time. The goal of Microsoft services was to work with the governments, was to work with large customers and help define their IT strategy, like their IT needs, IT solutions. Um, then on, I moved and I joined and applied a innovation team where the whole focus for us was, okay, how do we help organizations innovate with technology? How do we drive that innovation? That innovation led me into smart building projects where someone said, hey, how can we innovate with a building? And that was the engagement with the government of Singapore that happened. And because of my role working on innovative topics with accounts, with customers and with governments, I then said, you know what, this is something that I really want to focus on. So I was never part of Microsoft real estate or, global workplace services. Okay, I didn't start my career there. Yeah, I started my career on the consulting side, worked through that, and then I discovered the importance of human engagement and human experiences. So what I then did was I said, hey, why don't we help customers design smart buildings? So when I pitched that idea, you could imagine this, you are a part of a huge software company and then you go and tell your leadership, I want to design a smart building. And they're like, well, okay, sure, whatever that is. I said, no, I'm serious. They said, why would anyone want a technology company to design a smart building? Shouldn't that be the domain of architects, civil engineers, or building automation engineers? Isn't that what they do? And I said, that's the beauty of it. It's not. Because when they do it, they would do it so purely focused on a silo, because they're all about efficiency of their system. But in a building, you have 30 to 40 systems at a minimum, probably even more nowadays. And I said, hey, with all these systems going in, we are in the best position to define the engagement of a human, because the engagement of the human is going to span across all the systems in a building. And all these systems are siloed, they're disconnected, they don't talk to each other. They are efficient as individual systems, but collectively they don't perform. Right? And they said, you know this because you're a building engineer? I said, no. I know this because I've spoken to everybody within that industry and I've seen where the gaps are. So it wasn't an easy downhill trajectory. It was a very, very uphill against the grain, swimming against the wave kind of situation where I said, no, I think this is the right thing to do, because ultimately it's going to be about human engagement. Human engagement will tie back to the data. And I had the opportunity to go with that angle and to say that, okay, and at Microsoft, we always tried, we said, okay, sure, if this is something you really want to do, let's see where it goes. Let's see where the value is and what are the outcomes you would write. And that's when I started engaging multiple. I used to do these things, Tim, where I used to say that, okay, I'll help you build and define your smart building vision and strategy. Right. And this was probably my most trialing period, because I had to get up to speed on building code, building design. I had to get up to speed on building automation design. I had to get up to speed on the components that go into building, along with the manufacturers that make them. And I also have to understand the pains and pitfalls of a general contractor as they are bringing this building together. Because the whole angle for me was, smart building design is not IT-centric or IT-focused. Smart building design happens with everybody. IT is just one of the many players that comes to the table, but your GCs, your architects, your building automation, your component providers, and all the folks have to come together, and you have to convince them on how these systems will be able to impact human behaviors, and that was the challenge. So that was probably the most hardest part for me to pull together.
How did you do that? Were you just finding resources and just reading like crazy, or were you kind of going into your consulting mode and interviewing people and asking good questions?
So a bit of both. The beauty with consulting is, you could only get away for so long. Okay, after that, someone's going to come and say, show me the money. That's where the hardship comes in. But with my approach was very simple. I said, look, I need to know the subject. I need to understand. So I had to do a lot of self-studying to figure out how these buildings are built, created, and designed, and how they work together. The second part of it is I had to find a way to accelerate years of practical knowledge, which I didn't have. So when I go and talk to folks, I'll be able to understand what they're saying and basically empathize with what challenges they're facing. And the only way to do that was to do tours of duty with the building ops folks. And they would all ask me, right? And the funny bit was, there used to be a time when I used to wear suits all the time. Not so now. Uh, and they used to ask me, are you sure you want to hang out with us? I'm the guys, pretend I'm not even here. I'm just one of you. He said, no, you don't look like one of us, though. I'm like, hey, just imagine I'm one of you, and let's go with that. They said, fine. Because their whole confusion was, why would you leave the comforts of the space that you had, which they painstakingly maintain and organize, so folks like me could enjoy it. And they come and say, why do you want to come and sit and hang out with us? Because I said, look, guys, the knowledge you have, I don't have, and I will never get. But by just hanging around with you, I'm at least able to appreciate the work you do, how you do it, why you do it, and what motivates you to go to parts of a building which nobody would ever want to go to. What motivates you to wake up at odd times of the night, when there is an outage of a cooling system, or when something else happens to the building where, okay, everybody is sound asleep, but you guys are here trying to figure out what happened. They said, sure, and that was the walking the talk, spending time with them, learning, absorbing. I help them to see why what they are doing is so important to folks like me. Working with them and working with folks like that helped me build the structure of what a smart building strategy workshop should be. Taking inputs from them of the pain points, the challenges, the difficulties, the hours they spent. Something as simple as saying that, hey, why do you have to deal with compensation, and why do you need to have a moisture sensor there? Because they said, it doesn't bite you in one day. It builds and builds and builds, and eventually the entire ceiling soaks up, and one fine day the ceiling will fall right off. To avoid that is why we go and check the pipes every day for leaks, and we do that manually, and this is what the difficulty is. Working with cooling folks, especially in Singapore, they said, when you leave the door open and you have the wind curtain coming in, you think, oh, look at this, we're just blowing wind. Why do you need that? But the pain that they take to be able to compensate for outdoor temperature, indoor temperature, to ensure that you have a comfort factor where you'd love to be comfortable in that space is hard work. And they do all of it to ensure that the occupants of their building are happy. And I said, guys, it cannot be the occupants. It has to be you as well. It has to be any human. So reading, studying, hanging out with building operations folks, hanging out with equipment manufacturers, hanging out with the sales guys, because sales guys do a great pitch on what the value of the asset is, and hanging out with the engineers, because they then tell you what it actually is and what it can actually do. Pulling it all together helped me come up to speed. It's probably like saying, Tim, a 4-year degree was crammed into weeks and weeks of internship that I have with these folks, hanging around with them, and they were very, very open. I went on this stuff where we all said, hey, you know what, let me go and show you the fan coil. I was like, oh, okay. Then, do you want to wear comfortable shoes? I'm like, no, guys, these shoes are fine. They said, no. They said, why do you ask? They said, oh, because we have to climb a ladder, we have to go to the roof. And, when you go to the roof, that's what I said, you mean like the roof on top of a multi-story building? He said, yeah, that's it is. I'm like, okay, let's do this. Let's do it. And this is where you start to laugh and and say, wow. And you guys do this every day. They said, yep, this is basically our job. This is what we do. Those learnings, Tim, I don't think will ever go by. And the funniest part, on my first trip out, where I used to hang around with these folks, I used to take photos of everything. I used to go back home and I used to take notes on the photos, and they found it hilarious. They're like, why are you taking photos of machines? Yeah. I said, I don't know what these things do, right? And if I'm going somewhere else, I really need to understand this. And they said, okay, sure, and I snapped up photos. They said, do you want to take photos of you? I said, no. I like this machine. This machine is going to be in my book. And taking notes on those photos, So the argument was, would I have appreciated this space if I had to do mechanical? engineering degree and come out of it, being HVAC design. I probably would not. The very fact that I
Mm.
knew nothing about the industry, but I was all about human engagement and I wanted to understand how all the assets in a building could drive that engagement was probably the motivation for me, because I would see things that they would not see as to the value and importance of the time spent. So those years were it was like going through college all again, just without the fun. It is, all about studying and reading, focusing.
Well, which is kind of fun in its own regard, right? I mean, there's a strange satisfaction and learning those things and saying like, hey, I know that, and then it builds on top of each other throughout the whole process. Have you always been naturally curious?
To some extent, it really depends on what excites me and what motivates me. But conventionally, if I see something that I don't know what it is, I would stop, pause, and say, what is this? Why is it even here? So I would always, and I try to encourage my kids as well to do the same thing. They said, don't let anything pass you by. If there is something that you have not seen before, pause, look at it, try to figure out what it is. Maybe someone will tell you, the best case, somebody's just hanging around there, itching to go and tell you what this means, or you figure it out for yourself. So that curiosity I've always had. It's not, it's not the best, because I also have a tendency to do photo finishes for everything, be it a plane, be it a train, be it a cab, or be it getting into meetings. And one of the reasons is because, along the way, I'll tend to stop and say, hey, what is this? I didn't see this before. And people are like, oh man, you've already seen it. I said, no, I'm pretty sure I haven't seen it, guys. Let's all just wait and look. So that's probably one of the reasons why I tend to turn up right on time, or a few minutes late.
Yeah, fashionably late. That's what it is.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah, with very nice shoes. So one of the things that I feel like you've been kind of very intentional on is industry engagement through public speaking or being on webinars or telling the story or being on a panel at a trade show. So what has led you into doing more and more of that kind of public speaking and industry engagement?
So the motivation is very simple. In addition to me loving to talk, I also feel the biggest motivation is the ability to share. The ultimate tip is you should be able to go into any building and have that building adapt to your needs. It doesn't matter whether you own that building, you work in that building, or you're just visiting that building. It shouldn't matter at all. You as a human are entering space, and the space should be able to cater to your needs and demands. And the only way that the space will cater to it is if the space is open enough to accept your needs and demands. And by speaking and sharing these ideas with multiple people, I then help them start to see that, hey, why don't we all design spaces so that anyone that comes into it will have the same experiences no matter where they go, right? And this is something that I believe, it doesn't matter who I work for or who I'm working with. I should be able to go anywhere in any country and have that space adapt to my needs. Because ultimately, Tim, we're all humans and we all have needs and we all have wants. Why should who I am, where I come from, and who I work for matter to the services that I need? Because it's not about all that. It's about me as the human wanting a basic service to make my day more meaningful and more productive. So when I share the approach with people, through public speaking events or through design sessions, I used to do during a heyday, Tim, and this shows you how engaged I was. The smart building strategy workshops that I used to run, I learned a lot. I should say I probably benefited a lot more than the attendees themselves. But then people were so keen that I was almost booked out for a year. So this is in addition to the strategy work that I help organizations define what a smart building is, and then overseeing the implementation of that project. So I would tell folks that, guys, I am booked out solid for a year. And, people ask me, how? I'm like, it's very simple. I just give an avenue for people to tell me what they want, and I help them design these services so they can achieve it in their building. This is where the beauty comes in, and where my goal is sharing as much as possible. So when I asked you, if I have to randomly tell you, hey, Tim, why don't I design your next building to have a positive impact on human behaviors, right? You probably think, whoa, look, man, I have a budget, I have a fixed timeline. I really can't do
Yeah.
it because, it's all about efficiency. And by the way, I need to get LEED platinum on these buildings. You're adding more devices in, and you're collecting data, that's going to spook the tenants or spook anybody that comes inside. Really, we don't have the appetite for it, right? You won't even consider it. But then if I tell you, hey, Tim, it is really not going to impact your project timeline. It's not going to impact the assets that you're getting in. And I will be able to drive more footfall, better efficiency, and more delightfulness of the people that come into contact with the building, thereby increasing the priced value of your real estate. Then you're like, whoa, really? How would you do it? Have you done this before? That's why I share this, because it's not difficult, Tim. It's not hard. And the more I share this, the more people start appreciating it and they start trying it out for themselves. Where my ultimate goal is, smart buildings is not world domination. It is human empowerment to ensure humans are satisfied and are the most productive version of themselves. And the only way to do that is by sharing the approach and the knowledge openly and freely with everyone.
That's right. The democratization of these kinds of conversations, and then empowering and essentially enrolling people into that same mindset. It's not only good for you, it's not only good for Microsoft, it's good for everyone that listens, and then everyone that's affected, all the stakeholders of the technology and the way that we're designing these buildings. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Emmanuel, I think it's for anyone that's listening, I think it's pretty obvious why I wanted you to be on the podcast, because the whole spirit of the Building Geniuses podcast is, again, taking these different approaches and different kinds of conversations and applying it to our industry to really expand the good that's being caused and empower these positive impacts that are happening. And you have a particular value system and spirit and heart that I know is foundational to everything that you're doing in this space. And it's an encouragement and inspiration to me. And I hope that everyone else listening likewise gets that same encouragement and inspiration. So thank you so much for being a part of this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. Absolutely a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, that wraps this episode of the Building Geniuses podcast, a production of KMC Controls. If you've enjoyed this conversation, we encourage you to subscribe and share. And if there's anyone that you would like to hear on our podcast, tag them in the comments or reach out to us. I'd love to reach out to them or tag them in the comments. And as always, we appreciate you listening. Until next time, learn something new, teach someone something, and build your inner genius.